We tend to think of the human brain like, well, like this impenetrable fortress.
Right, yeah.
Because evolution spent millions of years building up these massive microscopic walls to just keep everything out, to protect our most vital organ from, whatever random chemicals we happen to ingest with our lunch.
Exactly. The blood-brain barrier is, it's incredibly strict by design. It functions as the ultimate biological security checkpoint,
Yeah.
formed by this really tight, dense mesh of endothelial cells that, essentially scan every single molecule trying to pass from your bloodstream into your neural tissue.
Which makes total sense. You wouldn't want every single thing you eat to just directly alter your brain chemistry.
Definitely not.
But I was reading this fascinating piece on Substack recently by a writer named SpiralSeekr, and it completely tears down how we view this whole process when it comes to one specific, very popular supplement.
Oh, yeah. The 5-HTP piece.
Yeah, right. The piece is called 5-hydroxytryptophan as a daily supplement, mechanisms, efficacy, and risks. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically translate the really intense biochemistry within this text for you.
Because, 5-HTP is sitting right there on the shelf at almost every local grocery store. And pharmacies, too.
Yep, everywhere.
Usually pitched in these bright, calming letters as a simple natural mood booster.
But we are going to cut through that marketing today.
Mm-hmm.
We want to find out what actually happens to your biology, to your entire system, when you try to biohack your brain's serotonin factory. I really want to understand the mechanical realities of forcing our neurochemistry into overdrive.
It's a wild ride, biologically speaking.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can figure out if a supplement actually makes you feel better, we have to trace the physical journey it takes to get inside your brain in the first place. And I was surprised to learn that you can't just take a pill of pure serotonin.
No, you can't. Exogenous serotonin, meaning serotonin produced outside of your own body, is completely useless for your central nervous system if you just swallow it.
Really? It just does nothing.
It physically bounces off that security checkpoint we just talked about.
Wow.
The molecules are either too large or just structurally incompatible to pass through the blood-brain barrier.
Okay, so think of the blood-brain barrier like an exclusive, high-end nightclub.
I like that, yeah.
Regular serotonin, just some guy off the street who isn't on the guest list,
Yeah.
argues with the bouncers, but he is fundamentally not getting inside.
Right.
But then we have 5-HTP. The article explains this is a naturally occurring amino acid derived commercially from the seeds of an African plant called Graphonia simplicifolia.
Yes.
And somehow 5-HTP acts like a guy with the ultimate all-access VIP backstage pass. It doesn't even have to wait in line. It just freely penetrates the barrier and walks right in. How is it able to do that?
Well, it comes down to structural size and cellular transport. 5-HTP is an intermediate metabolite. It is literally one biochemical step away from becoming serotonin. So the bouncers at the nightclub look at it and say, oh, you're an amino acid. We have designated transport channels for you. And they just wave it right through.
That is wild.
What's fascinating here is what happens the exact moment it crosses that threshold. Once 5-HTP is safely inside the central nervous system, it bumps into a specific enzyme called aromatic L-amino acid decarboxylase. We just call it AADC for short.
Thank goodness, because that is a mouthful. And AADC is the biological machine that physically transforms the 5-HTP into active serotonin, right?
Exactly. It strips away a carboxyl group and suddenly, boom, you have pure active serotonin floating around in the brain.
Just like that.
Just like that. But the real biochemical significance here is that by taking 5-HTP, you are completely bypassing the body's natural rate-limiting step.
Right. The article kept mentioning this rate-limiting step involving something called tryptophan hydroxylase.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I got a bit lost in the chemistry there.
Yeah.
What is that actually doing?
Okay, let's look at how your body normally operates. Under normal circumstances, you get an amino acid called L-tryptophan from your diet.
From, like, foods we eat every day.
Yeah, from foods like turkey, eggs, or cheese. Your body takes that tryptophan and uses an enzyme called tryptophan hydroxylase to turn it into 5-HTP.
Okay, following so far.
But your biology places a strict limit on how fast and how often that specific enzyme can work. It's like a mechanical governor on a car engine.
Oh, I see.
It stops the system from going too fast. Evolutionarily, we don't want wildly fluctuating brain chemistry just because we ate a massive omelet, right?
Okay, so the brain intentionally throttles the production line.
Exactly.
But when we take 5-HTP as a supplement, We are skipping that step entirely. We're tossing out the governor and feeding the engine directly with the almost finished product.
Yes, you are handing the brain the direct raw materials and forcing the factory into maximum production. And because serotonin also acts as the direct precursor to melatonin,
Wait, melatonin, the sleep hormone.
the very same. So you aren't just ramping up your mood chemicals, you are fundamentally altering your body's circadian rhythms at the same time.
Wow. So we have this VIP molecule. It effortlessly bypasses the bouncers, walks into the club, and starts throwing serotonin around because the governor's completely gone.
That's the visual, yeah.
The logical assumption, and definitely what the supplement companies want us to believe, is that more serotonin directly equals a better mood. But SpiralSeekr points out that the clinical evaluations are, well, they're shockingly murky.
Yeah, people assume neurochemistry is this simple input-output equation. More of the happy chemical should just equal more happiness.
But the data just doesn't support that cleanly. I mean, yes, the piece notes that some smaller trials show 5-HTP is better than a placebo for managing mild depressive symptoms.
They're in small samples.
But when you look at the really big comprehensive meta-analyses, specifically the ones from the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, they point out a severe lack of rigorous, large-scale clinical validation.
Which is a huge red flag.
Right. If 5-HTP goes straight into the brain and directly converts into serotonin without any speed limits, why are those massive Cochrane reviews so mixed on the actual mood benefits?
To understand that, we really have to look at how neural circuits actually function. Having the raw neurotransmitter available in the brain doesn't dictate how your neurons are going to utilize it.
Okay.
Neurochemistry is intensely complex and incredibly context-dependent.
You know, it sounds to me like dumping a massive pile of bricks at a construction site.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, like, yes, bricks are the precursor to a house.
Yeah.
But just because you backed a dump truck up and dropped all the materials in the yard doesn't automatically mean the house gets built properly.
Right, exactly.
You still need blueprints, you need workers, you need the right structural foundation.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. A pile of serotonin doesn't magically reorganize a depressed brain's architecture. The receptors have to be sensitive to it. The signaling pathways have to be intact. If the underlying issue in a depressive state is receptor downregulation, throwing more bricks at the problem won't build the house.
Makes total sense.
However, where the clinical data does show clearer efficacy is in the secondary physiological pathways.
Like the sleep architecture we touched on briefly.
Yes.
If we're making all this extra serotonin and serotonin turns into melatonin, we're basically flooding the brain with sleep signals.
We are. 5-HTP supplementation is frequently utilized to reduce sleep onset latency. That is the clinical term for how long it takes you to physically fall asleep after your head hits the pillow.
Which is something a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, absolutely. And the research indicates this effect becomes remarkably pronounced when you pair 5-HTP with GABA.
And GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, right?
It is.
How does combining the two actually change the outcome?
Think of GABA as the brakes on your nervous system. It quiets down the electrical noise and those racing thoughts in your brain.
Oh, I definitely need that sometimes.
We all do. So if you tear them, you are providing the melatonin materials to set your internal clock for sleep, while simultaneously using GABA to tell the brain to shut down the background chatter. It tackles insomnia from two completely different mechanical angles.
That makes a lot of sense. You're dimming the lights and turning off the loud music at the same time.
Exactly.
But there is another incredibly interesting context-dependent effect mentioned in the Substack, and that's appetite.
Oh, yes. Serotonin plays a massive role in modulating satiety cues in the hypothalamus.
The clinical trials show that taking 5-HTP can promote early satiety. Essentially, you feel full faster during a meal, which naturally reduces your overall caloric intake.
Which is why it's sometimes used for weight loss.
But what absolutely blew my mind is that it doesn't just reduce appetite across the board, it specifically curbs carbohydrate consumption.
The relationship between serotonin and carbohydrates is a fascinating biological feedback loop.
How so?
Often, when our brain wants more serotonin, it triggers a craving for heavy, simple carbohydrates. Eating those carbs spikes our insulin.
Okay.
That insulin spike then clears competing amino acids out of the bloodstream, which basically clears the highway for more of our natural tryptophan to reach the brain and become serotonin.
Wow. So when we get sad or stressed, our brain demands a bagel, because it's running a covert operation to manufacture serotonin.
That is exactly what it's doing.
But by taking 5-HTP, we are hacking that loop directly. We're giving the brain the serotonin building blocks up front, so it never has to send out that desperate SOS for carbohydrates.
Precisely. You're satisfying the brain's biochemical demand before the behavioral craving ever kicks in.
So it's dialing down our carb cravings and helping us fall asleep, which sounds incredible. I mean, almost like a magic pill.
It does sound that way.
Until you realize this is only happening because we've ripped the brakes off the serotonin factory. And a factory operating at maximum capacity with no governor is a massive liability.
It is. The pharmacological risks of bypassing the body's natural limits are severe, and they are almost never communicated to the average consumer buying this at the grocery store.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean we need to completely shatter the consumer assumption that just because a supplement is derived from an African plant seed, it is inherently safe.
Natural does not always mean safe.
Exactly. The piece outlines a life-threatening condition called Serotonin Syndrome.
Yes. This occurs when you push the central nervous system past a critical threshold of serotonin toxicity.
And this happens when people start combining 5-HTP with other medications that also boost serotonin, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about very common prescriptions, standard SSRIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, atypical antidepressants like bupropion, or even classic psychedelics.
All of the above.
If you mix the VIP molecule with these drugs, you aren't just boosting your mood.
No, you are essentially electrocuting your nervous system with its own communication chemicals.
That sounds horrific.
It is. Serotonin syndrome triggers massive autonomic hyperactivity. We see patients experience severe tremors, life-threatening hyperthermia, where their body temperature spikes dangerously high, and even seizures. The brain is quite literally short-circuiting from the chemical overload.
And the danger doesn't even stop at the brain, which is wild. There was a part of the text discussing peripheral serotonin accumulation that I found genuinely alarming.
The AADC enzyme issue.
Yes, it goes back to that ADC enzyme we talked about, the biological machine that converts 5-HTP into serotonin. I completely assumed that enzyme was only located inside the brain.
A very common misconception. AADC is highly active in peripheral tissues all throughout your body,
Like where?
specifically in your liver, and it's heavily concentrated in your gastrointestinal tract.
Which creates a massive logistical nightmare for the body when you swallow a 5-HTP capsule. Let's visualize this. Imagine your goal is to warm up your upstairs bedroom, which represents the brain. So you turn your home's heating system on full blast. But the furnace is fundamentally stuck in the basement, which is your gut. Because the 5-HTP meets that AADC enzyme in your stomach before it ever has a chance to travel up to the brain, it starts converting into active serotonin right there in the basement.
The biological conversion happens prematurely.
Right. The upstairs bedroom barely gets warm, but the basement turns into a sweltering, unbearable sauna. And biologically, that basement sauna translates into intense nausea, cramping, and severe gastric distress.
Because the gastrointestinal tract uses serotonin to regulate motility, which is basically how fast things move through your intestine.
Oh, so it just completely disrupts digestion.
Exactly. Flooding it with premature serotonin throws that entire system into chaos. But the acute nausea is only the short-term side effect. The long-term implications of peripheral accumulation are much darker.
Yeah, the article connects prolonged, high levels of peripheral serotonin to something called cardiac valve fibrosis.
Yes. Serotonin outside the brain acts as a potent growth factor for certain types of tissue. If you are constantly bathing your heart in excessive levels of peripheral serotonin, it stimulates the cells in your cardiac valves to proliferate. Over time, those delicate valves can physically thicken and stiffen, severely compromising your heart's ability to pump blood efficiently.
That is terrifying for a compound you can literally buy next to the vitamin C gummies. It begs the question, if this is so dangerous to our gut and our heart, how is it handled in a professional medical setting?
Well, in controlled clinical environments, physicians do not administer 5-HTP in isolation.
They don't.
No, they co-administer it with a specific pharmaceutical shield known as a peripheral decarboxylase inhibitor. The most common one used is called carbidopa.
And what exactly is carbidopa doing for the body?
Carbidopa acts as a chemical blocker for your peripheral tissues. It finds that AADC enzyme in your gut and your liver and temporarily shuts it down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, preventing the 5-HTP from converting into serotonin while it's still in your stomach or bloodstream. But the really ingenious part of carbidopa is that its molecular structure is too large to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, so it can't get past the bouncers at the nightclub.
Precisely. Carbidopa stays in the bloodstream, protecting your heart and your gut. Meanwhile, the 5-HTP safely travels past the blockade, crosses into the brain, And only then does it meet the active AADC enzymes waiting inside the central nervous system to convert it into serotonin safely.
It effectively forces the furnace upstairs into the bedroom where it belongs.
Exactly.
But the critical takeaway for you listening right now is that standard, over-the-counter 5-HTP supplements do not contain carbidopa.
Yeah.
They completely lack this vital pharmacological safeguard.
They do. When you self-medicate with powerful biochemical precursors without that shield, you are knowingly exposing your peripheral tissues to entirely unregulated serotonin synthesis.
Which is a massive blind spot.
Yeah.
But the collateral damage of this runaway factory isn't just about making too much serotonin in the wrong places. It's also about what you accidentally destroy along the way.
The chemical seesaw.
Right. SpiralSeekr details how your biology is a delicate chemical seesaw, and relying on 5-HTP can completely devastate your other critical neurotransmitters. Specifically, they highlight catecholamine depletion.
This highlights one of the most elegant yet fragile aspects of our neurochemistry. The synthesis of both serotonin and your motivation chemical dopamine relies on the exact same enzyme. They both need AADC to function.
So think of the AADC enzyme as the only espresso machine in a very busy corporate office.
I love these analogies.
Well, it helps me understand it. You have the serotonin workers and the dopamine workers, and they all need to use that one machine to get their jobs done. If you flood the system with massive doses of 5-HTP, the serotonin workers essentially monopolize the espresso machine all day long.
They saturate the enzyme's capacity.
And the dopamine workers are just stuck standing in line, indefinitely waiting for their turn. Production on the dopamine side grinds to an absolute halt. By forcing the enzyme to process all this 5-HTP, you are competitively inhibiting your baseline production of dopamine and norepinephrine.
It creates a perfect biochemical bottleneck. The clinical result of this is profound. Sustained administration of 5-HTP without concurrent dopamine support will systemically deplete your dopamine levels over time.
That's a huge trade-off.
It is. You might temporarily elevate your serotonin, but you are tanking your dopamine to achieve it.
Which totally defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
You might not feel deeply sad anymore, but without dopamine, you're going to feel utterly unmotivated and lethargic.
Yep.
You have to balance the chemical seesaw, which the article notes is usually done by supplementing with dopamine precursors like L-tyrosine alongside the 5-HTP.
Yes. You have to supply raw materials to both sides of the factory to keep the espresso machine balanced.
But the bottleneck issue doesn't even stop there. We also have to look at what provides the electricity for the espresso machine itself. And that brings us to the B vitamins. I was a bit confused by the depth of the chemistry in this section. The piece mentioned something called PLP.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture of how enzymes function, it becomes clear why isolated supplements often fail to deliver results. That AADC espresso machine doesn't just run on magic.
Fortunate, but true.
It requires an obligate enzymatic cofactor called pyridoxal 5-phosphate, or PLP. PLP is simply the active bioavailable form of vitamin B6.
So B6 is the literal electricity powering the machine.
Without a sufficient supply of systemic PLP, the AADC function is rate limited. The espresso machine is effectively unplugged from the wall.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't matter how much 5-HTP you swallow. Without active vitamin B6, the synthesis of central nervous system serotonin diminishes to a halt.
Okay, B6 powers the machine. But there was another part of that section that sounded like pure science fiction to me. The text highlighted collateral B vitamins, specifically B9, which is folate, and B12. And it said they regulate something called the one-carbon cycle to synthesize a methyl donor called SAME. I'm going to need you to translate all of that into plain English. What is a methyl donor and why does my brain care?
Let's visualize your brain's neurotransmitter receptors as highly complex, specific locks on a door.
Okay.
In order for serotonin or dopamine to actually open those locks and do their jobs, they have to be shaped perfectly. A methyl donor, like a SIME, is essentially a biological key cutter.
A key cutter, okay.
It attaches tiny chemical tags methyl groups to molecules, which shapes them and ensures the neurotransmitters actually fit into the cellular locks.
So without B9 and B12 running that key cutting cycle, the serotonin we just forced the brain to make won't even be able to bind to the receptors properly. It's just uselessly floating around.
The entire system degrades. The body is a massively interdependent machine. You can't just turn one dial up to maximum and expect everything else to dynamically adjust on its own.
Which means the co-administration of a comprehensive vitamin B complex isn't just some holistic health bonus. It is a mechanical necessity.
Absolutely.
You have to prevent these cofactor-induced bottlenecks so the cellular machinery actually has the electricity and the key cutters it needs to run.
And practically speaking, this intricate balance dictates the administration parameters we see outlined in the clinical literature. To manage these risks, effective therapeutic doses typically range from 50 milligrams to 300 milligrams per day.
But the piece emphasizes that you shouldn't just take that all at once.
Because 5-HTP has a relatively short biological half-life, it clears from the system quickly. So dividing that dose throughout the day maintains a more stable chemical equilibrium.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, while its absorption doesn't strictly depend on food, taking it with meals helps mitigate that transient gastrointestinal distress we discussed earlier.
Basically, putting some food in the stomach acts as a physical buffer to help calm down that downstairs furnace turning into a sauna.
It slows down the rapid peripheral synthesis, giving your body a chance to manage the compound more effectively.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all this incredibly complex biology together for you, the core takeaway is this. 5-HTP, derived from the seeds of that graphonia plant, is an incredibly potent, fast-acting VIP backstage pass to your brain.
Yes, it is.
It bypasses the natural governors and floods the neural might club.
Hmm.
But wielding that kind of biochemical power requires immense respect. You can't just swallow a pill and blindly biohack your mood without consequences.
Definitely not.
You have to consciously balance the chemical seesaw with things like L-tyrosine so you don't tank your motivation. You absolutely must dodge the severe life-threatening risks of serotonin syndrome by never mixing it with prescription antidepressants. And you have to keep your B vitamins fully stocked to ensure the entire biological factory doesn't unplug itself.
All of this leaves us with a fascinating paradigm shift to consider. We have just spent the last few minutes exploring how incredibly fragile the balance of our mental state truly is. We're looking at a single enzyme ADC acting as a literal battleground for competing chemicals like dopamine and serotonin. If our psychological well-being is dictated by these easily bottlenecked, highly sensitive chemical pathways, it challenges the entire premise of modern supplementation. Are we eventually moving toward a future where mental health isn't treated by taking isolated, blunt force supplements off a grocery store shelf, but rather through dynamic algorithmic tuning of these exact enzyme pathways in real time?
That is a brilliant question to chew on, and it perfectly highlights why we need to look so much closer at the things we are casually putting into our bodies. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, always look past the marketing, and remember to check the science behind the supplement. We'll catch you next time.